What are some words that come to your mind when you hear the word authority? Boss, absolutely. What did you say? Captain. Mm-hmm. Power. Bound up in the idea of authority is indeed the idea of power, but it's power in relationship. And both the other words that popped up, boss and captain, it's power in relationship to others. There's an authority that's vested in a particular person that gives him power over others to delegate, to command, etc. But also authority can be in relation, authority with regard to, most of the time we think of it in relation to other people, but could also be over a realm, a region, resources, etc. We live in a world where a lot of times the idea of authority has negative connotations, and indeed, every one of us knows what it's like to be hurt by an evil kind of authority in one manner or another. Let me introduce you to Eric Tafoya. Eric was raised in a Christian home to believe in God, but he drifted. He drifted into the streets, got involved with gangs, gang violence. Now imagine, I want you to see Eric today. I want you to see him, the scene of Eric having been involved with drug violence or gang violence, caught up in drug addiction, and because of that, involved in a crash that killed an innocent man. Sitting in prison. He was under the authority of his own passions, and he joined the gang, came under the authority of the gang, came under the authority of drug addiction. And then he had to face the consequences of the authority of the land when he killed an innocent man through causing that crash. As he sits there, by all accounts, the way we would look at him, here's a man that has ruined his life, and he's hopeless. The reality is that maybe it's not an extreme story as Eric, but we all have people we love who are caught up in the brokenness and authority of addictions. And we're told that in our lives, we're not living neutral lives, that we wage war against spiritual darkness and wickedness and the authorities of the demonic realm. And for every person's life that gets chewed up by addiction or violence, or chewed up in maybe in a more mellow way by bitterness and resentment that turns you into a toxic person, held sway under the authority of dark spirits. The reality is that we live in a world that's dominated by the wrong kind of authority, and it touches our lives even in ways that we may not acknowledge. That sounds like a real bummer of a message to hear on a Sunday morning. It's bad news, but I did not come to I acknowledge the bad news, but I came to revisit the good news. Is that we have a King Jesus, sent from the Father in the power of the Spirit, taking flesh in the womb of the Virgin Mary, fully God and fully man, who showed up on the earth, and he brought the very authority of God to bear upon the false authority of Satan and his minions. In fact, one of the things that Jesus said he came to do, he said, I came to destroy the devil and his works. Now, he came in a way that caught people off guard. He didn't show up with the hype and the flash and the dash. He showed up in a humble form. You remember that show a few years ago, Undercover Boss, a reality TV show, where the head of a corporation would act like a newly hired worker and come among the workers and see what was going on. It was almost like Jesus was the undercover boss. But there were times when, under the direction of the Father by the Spirit, he would show that authority. And the text we have today was recalled by the apostles and those they shared it with long after Pentecost, when they came to acknowledge that this Jesus who came to us with this authority, who rose and has all authority, has now indwelt them by the Spirit, and that authority is at work in them. And so as we go back to the text, I want to read this with post-Pentecost eyes. And I want to revisit the authority of Jesus in this text. It gives me so much hope, even as my heart is broken, as I see people I love under the authority of dark forces. The text that Arlene read, were you listening? In this text, Jesus had traveled with his disciples. They had crossed the Sea of Galilee, and I mentioned that on that journey across, they had this terrible storm that threatened everybody, and Jesus spoke and took authority over the storm. But then they land on the east side of the Jordan in a region that in Jesus' day was predominantly non-Jewish. One big clue you have in our text is that there was a massive herd of pigs there. You're not dealing with Jewish people. Okay? And so, in this story, when they show up, yes, we have the apostles as the silent witnesses watching this. But who are the people and the ones involved in this story? Who's the central figure beside Jesus in this story? The demon-possessed man, right? And then we have, of course, the demons. And then who else do we have? We have the pigs. But in terms of people, we have the ones that witnessed it and also the townspeople from the region that gathered. But as we look at this story, I want us to see it against the backdrop of this man who's the subject of Jesus' awesome, transformative, and gracious authority. And as we look at this text, I want us to have a new and a deeper appreciation for this. I have heard this. I grew up in a church. I've heard this story many, many times, but I want to tell you, the Holy Spirit has just reignited my heart with an optimism that is based in Jesus' awesome, transformative, and gracious authority. but it's portrayed against a really dark backdrop. And let's look at the profile of this man. What's the first thing that we learn about this man? He's dominated by demons. Okay? How is the profile even talked about more? Do you remember the descriptors? We also know, based on the text, that it had been a long time that he'd been dominated. What was he dressed like? He was buck naked. He was naked. Now, even today, there are certain little pockets of nudist colonies, but it's still not the norm to see somebody walk down a street buck naked. I haven't seen that in Amanda ever. This man was naked, dominated by demons. What else? And it had been a long time. Where did he live? It said he hadn't been at home for a long time. Where did he live? He lived in the tombs. I've actually been there, and there is archaeological evidence of a graveyard there. And a lot of times they would have these caves in which they would store these bodies and so forth. And he was living in these grave caves, in these tombs. Okay? How else is he described in our text? Yes, he was imprisoned. They would bind him with chains and keep him under guard. The demons would seize him many times, snap the chains, and drive him out into the wasteland. Now, this is a pretty hopeless looking. This is a man under the grip of dark authority. Can we agree? I think of Eric in that prison cell, under the grip of guilt and shame. And it's against this backdrop I want us to treasure the authority of Jesus. It's portrayed to make it unmistakably clear that Jesus' authority is awesome. Now, when we hear the word awesome, we've turned it into a little cliche. Oh my goodness, that sauce on that chicken was awesome. Oh, can you meet me at so-and-so at the store? Awesome, I'll be there. Okay, I know we throw it around like that. I'm not being Scrooge about that. But really, the word awesome, it's a word for overwhelming respect and even fear of a good kind. And it could be fear of a bad kind. Jesus' authority is awesome because he is the one who dominates demons. Now, do you see how this man, under the grip, under the domination of demons, he had no control. He was possessed. Even though the people couldn't bind him with their chains, the demon-possessed man could not escape the chains of the demons. But have you ever asked yourself, what does it take to scare a demon? We usually think of demons scaring us. And the answer is Jesus Christ. In this encounter, we have an awesome, literally awesome encounter in which a man dominated by demons meets the God-man who dominates demons. And you have the demons begging Jesus. And Jesus had been speaking. Before we ever hear a word come out of their mouth, we indicate from verse 29 that Jesus had been commanding the demons to come out. And these demons were begging him, please take it easy. Please just let us go into the pigs. Demons? There's authority when the demons have to beg you. And Jesus sends them into the pigs, and that's where they go. And the pigs rush off into the Sea of Galilee and drown. Now we know from Mark's parallel passage, there were about 2,000 hogs in that herd of pigs. That's authority. That's authority. Anybody who has the ability to dominate demons has awesome authority. Are you really awed by the authority of God? Think about whatever it is that either has you trapped or somebody you love trapped. We can think so much about that authority where it almost is as if we're more impressed with that than we are the authority of Jesus. Even though we can't see Jesus right now, he is in the house. And he is in control. And he is bigger than any demon you could ever face. And I want you to know something. As a Christian, there will come times that perhaps, maybe you've not experienced this, but perhaps in your life, this has happened to me multiple times, where I will encounter an awareness of the demonic. And let me push pause for a second about this. Most of the demonic work and the work of the devil that happens is not in an obvious way like this. He's too slick for that. Like if you were being hunted by a brutal assassin, which one would you rather have to deal with? An assassin that is 10 foot tall and 600 pounds of pure muscle, has the best body armor, has bulletproof skin and the best weapons, or would you rather deal with an assassin that's totally invisible that you can't see? As hideous as that dude is, the 10 feet tall, I would rather deal with a massive dude that I could see than one I can't. Now, most of the work of Satan and his minions happens in this invisible way. Happens not in an obvious way like this man. It happens when we give in to resentment and anger and lust and greed and we perpetrate an injustice on another. We are under the sway of darkness. But in this case, there are some times, though, and other times, there will times when the demonic will pull the mask off to just intimidate and openly dominate. And I want to tell you something. There will be times as a believer, if you take seriously Jesus and bear witness to him, there will come times when you will be creeped out by an awareness of a dark force. Who knows? A lot of times you'll be by yourself when it'll happen. I want you to know, as a child of God, the dark forces cannot possess you. They can oppress you. But if you are a child of God and the Spirit of God lives in you, you cannot be possessed by demons. And when they try to oppress you, you plead the authority of Jesus. And I want you to know that Jesus' authority is awesome because he's the one that dominates demons. Jesus' authority is also transformative because he's the one who heals the hopeless and shakes up the status quo. Let's look at the first part. He heals the hopeless. Look at that man. Hear his profile. He's dominated by demons. A long time he had not worn clothes or lived in a house. He lives in the tombs, chained by people, snapped out of those chains by demons, driven into the wasteland. Jesus shows up, and this demon-possessed man sees Jesus And Jesus had been speaking to the demons inside him. We know from the next verse. Look at verse 28. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, saying, Jesus, would you please work it in your schedule to help me? No, that's not what it said. Shouting at the top of his voice, what do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? The demonic forces within him knew who Jesus was. We're told in James that the demons believe and they tremble. And he says, I beg you, don't torture me. Why would he say that? Look at the next verse. For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of him. Jesus is already dealing with the demon inside him. And this poor man wants no part of whatever's going to happen to that demon. And as jacked up as he is, as hopeless as he looks, what does he do? He casts himself at the feet of Jesus. He cries out to Jesus. He asks Jesus for mercy. And Jesus asked, what is your name? And then he says, Legion, for we are many. Legion is a word for a massive number back then. At this time of this text, a Roman legion was a military unit over 5,000 people. It's a word for a ton of people. And this poor man had been so dominated by demons that his identity was bound up in his possessedness by this mob of demons. And he says, Legion, call me Legion, for we are many. His voice was being choked up and blended with the voice of the demonic. And I want to tell you something. Sometimes when your loved ones speak out to you and lash and they say unusual things, their voices that you loved and knew are being taken over and used and dominated and twisted by the dark forces. But that's when Jesus kicks out the demons and sends them into the herd. Look at the contrast. Let's go over it again. He was demon-possessed for a long time, had not worn clothes or lived in his home, but lived in the graves. He'd been chained again and again, repeatedly, and held prisoner. He was snapped out of those chains by the demons who would drive him like a wild man into the wilderness. But look at the contrast. If you look at verse 35, the end of verse 35, how is he described? He's sitting. Instead of roving around like a wild man, he's sitting where? At the feet of Jesus. And by the way, if you look at the Gospels, that's a pretty darn good place to sit. You see the authority, he's coming up under the authority of Jesus. You see that? He's sitting at the authority, he's sitting at the feet of Jesus. How is he described? The naked man is now what? Dressed. And the man that was not in his right mind is what? In his right mind. Is that a transformation? But how else is he transformed? If you look later in the text, when other people push Jesus away, what does he say he wants to do with Jesus? I beg you, it's interesting. The same term, now there's different words for asking and begging in this term, but there's a particular term that is only used by this demon-possessed man, and it's used early when he begs Jesus for mercy. And it's the exact same term it's used later in the text, in the original language, when he begs Jesus to let me follow you. Jesus said, no. Jesus said, I commission you to go back to your town and tell everything that God has done. So he moves from being dominated by, and then he goes and does it. He's transformed from a demon-possessed man into an evangelist. And this healing is not just kicking out the demons. And I want you to know that our Lord and Savior does not simply want to save us from hell, and I'm glad He does. The healing He wants to work in us is way bigger. He wants to establish us as whole. He wants to clothe us in a right mind, sitting under His authority, commissioned for His purpose. Is that transformative? Would you call that transformative authority? Amen? But there's another part of this transformative authority. His transformative authority is seen in that He's the one who heals the hopeless. And we see this transformation of this man. But He also shakes up the status quo. And this is part of the text that breaks my heart. Put yourself in the shoes of the townspeople. Imagine a town like Amanda. If we had a demon-possessed wild man that terrified everybody that walked anywhere near him, and we tried to lock him up and we couldn't, and he lives in the graves, and he's running around and screaming and cutting himself and acting all, making everybody scared. And now so the demons go into the pigs, and we know from Mark's parallel passage that 2,000 of them went into seed. And listen, in that time, even today, you wouldn't be poor if you had 2,000 hogs. But in that time, whoever owned those was insanely wealthy, probably the wealthiest person in the whole region. And the people that tended the pigs came and told the town, and word came, and the townspeople and the whole region came out to see what happened, and they see this wild man who's terrorized everybody, who's now clothed in his right mind and sitting at the feet of Jesus. And what does the text say was their response? They were afraid. Isn't that interesting? Well, they were awestruck that something happened. This Jesus, whoever it is, showed up and he shook up the status quo. Guess what? There's a very insanely wealthy man who has 2,000 less hogs. That shakes up the status quo. Who knows what he's going to do to our farm? They were awestruck by his power, but guess what? They were uncomfortable with the fact that he showed up and shook things up in that way. And what did they ask him to do? They begged, they admonished in a really intense, please get out of our area. Guess who else was under the authority of the darkness for them to be able to say that? Their own minds. Here was one who showed up, the very God-man with authority over demons. He showed up and was setting people free right and left. And yet, instead of saying, whoa, we see the miracle that happened in this guy, they didn't care about him. They would rather deal with his demons than let Jesus shake up the status quo. And I want you to know something. When Jesus walks into your life, He does shake up the status quo. There are some things that will become uncomfortable. He doesn't just walk in and wave a little wand and we go on our selfish life. He shakes things up. He changes people. And you have these two different responses. This man that was set free, sitting at the feet of Jesus, obeying the commands of Jesus, evangelizing others. And you have these townspeople that say, please go away, Jesus. And so Jesus left. Jesus' authority is awesome. It's transformative. Both for those who want it and cast themselves in mercy, He heals the hopeless. And for those who push Him away, He'll let them because He shakes up the status quo. But there's another aspect of the authority of Jesus that's different than almost any king that you've ever read about in history. His authority is not only awesome, it's not only transformative, it is gracious. You see, how, Mersh? How, Pastor? Well, first of all, the very fact that he showed up in non-Jewish territory showed that he cared about them. And then, of course, his graciousness in healing the demon-possessed man. But look at what he told the man to do. The man begged to go with Jesus. What did he tell the man to do? Go back to your town and tell everything God has done for you. And that word for tell, a lot of times it's used to mean, I want you to explain in detail the good news of how God has changed you. What was Jesus doing? He was being gracious because he's the one who still pursues those who pushed him away. The very people who pushed him away, Jesus had a plan to reach him, and it was through this man that had been demon-possessed. And this man who is demon-possessed becomes their evangelist. And we're told in the parallel passage of Mark that he not only went through his hometown, like he's talked about here, but he went through that whole region. That region was called the Decapolis. If you see a little quick map on the screen, if you go east of the Sea of Galilee, there's 10 cities. It's what Decapolis means. And these are city-states under Roman authority, pagan city-states. And there's only one of them west of the Jordan. And he goes throughout the Decapolis. This man is evangelist on steroids. He's lit up by the good news of God. And he goes. And I want you to know that at this day of grace, Jesus' authority is not only awesome and transformative, but he still continues through us to pursue those who pushed him away. Now the question really is, Jesus' authority gone? Do you believe Jesus is still authoritative? The question is, which way are you going to respond? In this text, we see two human responses. One that casts himself on the mercy of Jesus, is transformed, comes under his authority, and submits and becomes an evangelist. Others that say, we want the status quo. Somebody said, what's the status quo mean? One fellow said, it's Latin for the mess we're in. No, but it means the way things are normally. They would rather cling on to their normal life and push Jesus away because he makes them uncomfortable. We have a choice. And I want you to know, let's not be so beat down by the hurt that's come upon our friends and family that we give up on Jesus' ability to set them free. And let's not stop bearing witness to how he set us free. And if he hasn't set you free today, he can. He's here. And I know we've been here a minute, but I want us just to savor this for longer. It's worth it. It's worth more than anything we'll do in the next 10 minutes. In just a moment, we're going to stand. We're going to sing a song of witness. I am redeemed. And while we're singing that song, if you are heartbroken over a family member, a friend that is bound up in chains, and you want to come and represent that by kneeling at the altar and praying to God for them, or if there's an area in your own life where you have not been set free, you can come. But I want you to know that Jesus' authority is still awesome, it's still transformative, and it's still gracious. Remember I told you, I introduced you to Eric Tafoya? A man who gave into the authority of gang violence, drug addiction, wound up killing an innocent man through a crash, locked up in prison. I was taking you back in the present time, back in the time of a scene. But This week, I heard the testimony of Eric Tafoya. He has been set free for years. And he is actually a genius. He is intellectual genius, but he has been commissioned by Christ to go back into the streets and go to places that no one else will want to go, the rough street people, the homeless. He goes back to the prisons, and he's leading a ministry, and he's also leading an apologetic ministry that argues for the correctness of the Christian faith, but he puts his ministry in real time. I heard his witness. The same Jesus that set free the demon-possessed man, he set free Eric Tafoya. And Eric Tafoya, under the authority of Jesus, is now a powerhouse of hope. The same Jesus that lived in that demon-possessed man and turned him into an evangelist, the same Jesus that lives in Eric Tafoya, he lives in you. Will you stand with me? And as we sing this song, I want it to be your witness. And if it's